There were 23 people in the Meridian Motors conference room when Dara Venn fired him. 23 people around a glass table on the 11th floor of a building that had his work on every wall. Renderings, clay study photographs, cut-line diagrams, framed in brushed aluminum at precisely the height the interior designer had specified. Every car in those frames had come from the same hand. The hand that was, at that moment, holding a ballpoint pen over a paper napkin, sketching something in the margin, while the quarterly earnings presentation played on the screen at the far end of the room. He was not paying attention to the presentation. That was what Dara Venn saw. That was what the 23 people in the room saw. What none of them saw was what was on the napkin. His name was Isaac Cole. He was 33 years old. He was sitting 3 seats from the end of the table in a blue shirt that had a small ink stain near the second button. Not from today. From weeks ago, the kind of stain that settles into cotton past the reach of ordinary laundering. His hair needed cutting. Beside his chair, on the floor, was a canvas tote bag with a child's drawing taped to the outside. A yellow car with enormous wheels and a smiling sun above it, done in crayon, signed in large uneven letters, June. Attached to the bag's handle, by a loop of yarn, was a small stuffed elephant, the color of river clay, its trunk slightly bent from years of being gripped. The elephant's name was Bram. Dara Venn stopped mid-sentence, she said. Isaac, is there something more interesting happening on that napkin than in this room? 22 people looked at him. Some of them had worked with him for 7 years. Some of them had watched his hands produce the first sketches of cars that were now in showrooms across 14 countries. Not one of them said a word. Isaac looked up. He looked at the screen. He looked at Dara. He said quietly, "I'm listening. You're drawing," she said. "I can do both." It was not said with hostility. It was said the way a person states a fact about themselves that they have stated many times before and have no particular expectation of being believed. Dara Venn was 30 years old and had been CEO of Meridian Motors for 16 months, and she had learned, in those 16 months, that the 2 things most likely to erode her authority in a room of 23 people were inconsistency and the appearance of permitting what she had already signaled she would not permit. She had already signaled. She said, "Clear your things, Isaac. We'll talk after." They talked after, for 11 minutes. At the end of 11 minutes, Isaac Cole had a severance letter, a non-disclosure agreement, and a box of personal items from his desk, into which his assistant, a young woman named Mara, who had worked for him for 2 years and who was crying in a way she was clearly trying to suppress, placed everything, including a second stuffed elephant smaller than Bram, that Isaac kept on his monitor for reasons nobody had ever asked him to explain. He took the box. He took the tote bag from beside his chair. He straightened Bram on the handle. He walked to the elevator. He did not look back. On the napkin, folded now in his shirt pocket, was a sketch of a car that did not yet exist. A car that, if you knew what you were looking at, would stop you where you stood. Nobody at Meridian Motors had looked. Stay with this one. What comes out of that shirt pocket 8 days later, and who is in the room when it does, is the kind of thing that ends careers and begins them, sometimes in the same afternoon. His name was Isaac Cole, and before Meridian Motors there was a decade that most people who worked with him knew only an outline. He had grown up in a house with 1 bookshelf, which held 11 books, and a row of car magazines his father had collected through the 80s, organized by year. His father worked the line at a parts plant. His mother was a nurse who worked nights. What Isaac had, in the space between school and sleep, was time and paper, and the particular kind of focus that some children develop when the world doesn't offer much distraction and they find they don't need it. He drew cars. From the age of 8, almost exclusively cars. Not from model kits or magazines, though he had both from his head. Shapes that didn't exist yet. Proportions he couldn't have explained technically, but that were, in the way certain things are simply right, exactly right. A teacher named Mr. Aldred saw one of these drawings when Isaac was 14 and called his mother. He said, "Your son is doing something I don't have the vocabulary for. You should find someone who does." His mother found, through several phone calls that took several weeks and cost more effort than it might appear, a design program at a city college that offered a Saturday class for secondary students. Isaac attended every Saturday for 3 years. The instructor was a man named Preston Hall, who had spent 20 years in automotive design before an injury ended his drafting career, and he'd turned, without apparent regret, to teaching. Preston Hall looked at Isaac's drawings the way Gus Elton had looked at a turbine housing, the way Edmund Walsh had looked at a restored Ferrari. From the outside in, with the attention of someone who has spent a long time learning what correct looks like, and recognizes it immediately when it arrives. He said, "Don't let anyone tell you this is a hobby." Isaac did not let anyone tell him that. He went to design school on a scholarship he won with a portfolio that, according to one of the panel judges, was the strongest submitted in 9 years. He graduated. He spent 2 years at a British house doing concept work that never reached production, but taught him the distance between what could be imagined and what could be built. Then a man named Bernard Lowe, who ran the design division at a mid-size European manufacturer, saw one of Isaac's concept sketches in a trade publication and called him directly. Bernard Lowe was the reason Isaac came to Meridian Motors. Bernard had brought him in, protected him from the bureaucratic friction that surrounds genuinely original work, and given him the conditions: time, autonomy, a small team of people who understood their role was to execute his vision, not reshape it, under which the work could happen. Bernard Lowe had retired 11 months ago. He had been replaced by a structural reorganization. Dara Venn was the structural reorganization. She was not unintelligent. She was not unqualified. She had come from a financial services background, brought in by a board that had decided, in the particular way that boards sometimes decide, that what Meridian Motors needed was not more creative leadership, but tighter operational discipline. She understood margins and market positioning, and the language of shareholder return. She did not speak the language that Isaac Cole spoke, and she had never been told that she needed to. What she had been told by Dominic Carr, her VP of Strategic Operations, a man who wore suits the way armor is worn, and who had been at Meridian for 6 years and had his own vision of what the company should become, was that Isaac Cole was a difficult personality, an outlier, someone whose best work was behind him, and who was now a budget line that outweighed his contribution. She had been told this on 4 separate occasions, in 4 separate private conversations, each one adding a detail that made the picture slightly more certain. The 4th conversation had happened 3 days before the quarterly earnings meeting. What Dominic Carr had not told her, what he had taken considerable care to ensure she did not know, was that Isaac Cole had, under a project code name that Dominic controlled, designed the concept platform for Meridian's next 5-year vehicle lineup. A platform that was, at that moment, in advanced development. A platform worth, in projected revenue, somewhere in the region of $800 million over its first production cycle. A platform whose paperwork, whose conceptual origination documents, whose first principles design notes, whose signed and dated development brief, Dominic Carr had spent 3 months quietly repositioning as his own team's output. Isaac Cole had not known about the repositioning. He was about to find out. He drove to his sister-in-law's house with the cardboard box on the back seat and Bram on the passenger seat, because Bram was too large for the tote bag when the tote bag also had the box's overflow in it. June was at school until 3. He had 2 hours and 40 minutes. He made tea because his sister-in-law kept good tea, and he didn't keep any at his apartment. which he was aware said something about how he'd been living. He sat at the kitchen table. He took the napkin out of his shirt pocket. He unfolded it. He looked at what was on it. The sketch was 22 lines. 22 lines and 3 curves, done in ballpoint, on a paper napkin while a quarterly earnings presentation played onto screen at the far end of a conference room. It was the car he had been thinking about for 8 months. Not the project code platform. That was done, that was filed, that was sitting in a server folder under a project designation he no longer had access to. This was something else. Something that had been forming in the back of his, thinking the way things form when a mind is occupied with other things, and produces its actual work in the margin, 22 lines, 3 curves. A silhouette that suggested speed without the vocabulary of aggression. Something that looked, at first glance, like it belonged to a category of car that had not been named yet. He put the napkin on the table. He went to the drawer where his sister-in-law kept the good drawing paper. She was a landscape architect and kept good paper as a matter of professional habit, and he asked her, standing in the doorway of her studio, if he could use some. She looked at him. She had known him for 9 years, since before June was born, since before June's mother had died. A quiet death, ovarian cancer, 2 years ago, 18 months of treatment, and then the particular kind of mourning that doesn't resemble any other mourning. And she had learned, over those 9 years, to read the way he stood in a doorway. "How much do you need?" she said. "As much as you can spare," he said. She gave him a full pad. He took it to the kitchen table. He put Bram on the table beside the tea. He opened the pad. He started to draw. He drew for 6 hours. He drew through the tea and through picking June up from school and through making her dinner. Pasta with the sauce she liked, the one with the hidden carrots she had stopped trying to locate. And through June doing her reading at the table beside him, occasionally looking at the drawings, the way children look at things that hold their attention without their fully understanding why. "That's a good car," June said at one point, looking at the sheet he had just turned face up. "You think so?" he said. She leaned over it. She was 5.5, dark-haired, with an unhurried quality that she had not gotten from him, and that reminded him, every day, of her mother. She studied the drawing with the seriousness she brought to drawings in general, which was considerable. "It looks like it's already going somewhere," she said, even standing still. He looked at the drawing. He looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly it." She went back to her reading. He went back to the pad. Bram sat at the edge of the table, trunk slightly bent, the river clay color of him warm under the kitchen light. By 10 o'clock that night, he had 11 sheets. 11 sheets that, together, constituted something he hadn't had a name for until June described it. A car that looked like it was already going somewhere, even standing still. He had also, at some point during the 6 hours, remembered something, a date. 3 months ago, a Friday, the kind of afternoon where the office is half empty, and the server logs their work with a timestamp. He had filed the origination documents for the concept platform, the first principles brief, the initial sketches, the design rationale, under a temporary project folder, while waiting for the formal project designation to be assigned. The formal designation had been assigned the following Monday. The folder was moved. He had not been the one to move it. He opened his laptop. He logged into the personal cloud backup he kept out of professional habit. Not the company server, his own storage, where he mirrored his work automatically, because he had once lost 3 weeks of drawings to a system failure, and had resolved, quietly and permanently, never to lose anything again. He searched for the timestamp. He found it. He found everything. His sister-in-law's name was Patricia. In the morning, over coffee, while June was still upstairs with Bram, who had migrated from the kitchen table to June's room at some point during the night, as Bram regularly did, Isaac told her what he had found. Patricia was a landscape architect who had spent 15 years in professional environments where documentation, attribution, and the record of origination were not abstract concepts. She listened without interrupting. She asked 3 questions, each of them precise. Then she said, "You need Bernard Lowe." Bernard Lowe was retired. He had been retired for 11 months and had made it moderately clear that he intended to stay that way. He lived 200 miles north, on a property he'd bought for the purpose of being 200 miles from anything that required a suit. Isaac called him at 7 in the morning. Bernard Lowe answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was the same as it had always been, not warm in the performed sense, but warm in the way of someone who has spent a career around genuine work and developed a genuine respect for it. Isaac said, "I have something I need you to look at." Broussard said, "Is this the platform issue?" Isaac paused. "You know about the platform issue?" A long silence. "I've known for 2 months," Bernard said. "I was waiting to see if you'd find it." "Why didn't you?" "Because what you find yourself carries more weight than what you're told," Bernard said. "And because I needed you to find it in the right order." Isaac looked at the laptop screen, at the timestamp, at the folder structure. "What's the right order?" Bernard said, "Find Mara." Mara was Isaac's former assistant, the young woman who had been crying in the hallway when he left Meridian with his box. She was 26, precise, and had spent 2 years watching how Isaac worked closely enough to understand it, in ways that most people around him did not. She had also, in the course of those 2 years, processed a significant amount of administrative documentation related to the Concept Platform project, including the folder transfer. She had noted the folder transfer at the time. She had noted it the way careful people note things that seem anomalous. Not with alarm, but with the quiet registration of something that doesn't quite fit. She had saved the transfer log in her own records, the way careful people save things that don't quite fit, not knowing yet why, but trusting the instinct. She met Isaac at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Meridian building. On a Wednesday morning, with her laptop in her bag and the transfer log in a folder she'd printed the night before. She put it on the table. She said, "I was hoping you'd call." He looked at the log. He said, "This shows the move." "It shows the move, the timestamp, and the user credentials that executed it," she said. "It's not Dominic Carr's credentials directly. It's a service account that his team administers." She paused. "But the access log for that service account on that day shows 1 human login. At 2:17 in the afternoon." She turned the page. The name beside the login timestamp was not a surprise by that point. But it was the thing that made the rest of it real, in the particular way that named things are real and unnamed things are not. Isaac looked at the paper. He looked at Mara. She said, "Bernard Lowe called me yesterday." "I know," Isaac said. "He said to tell you there's a board meeting on Friday." Isaac folded the log carefully. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, beside the original napkin. He thought about 22 lines and 3 curves. He thought about June's voice. "It looks like it's already going somewhere, even standing still." He said, "I need 8 more days." He spent those 8 days drawing. Not in the kitchen, though the kitchen table became a secondary workstation. He cleared each evening for dinner and reset each morning before June. Woke up in the spare room at Patricia's house that she had given him as a studio. Temporarily, she said, which they both understood to mean for as long as he needed. He set up his equipment. The drafting board he kept at his apartment, brought over in 2 trips, and the set of instruments he had carried for 11 years since design school. French curves and radius gauges, and the particular set of pencils he favored. A brand he had been ordering from the same German supplier for a decade. He drew the car from the napkin through to something he had never produced before in the time allocated. A full preliminary concept package in 8 days. Not a production-ready specification, That would take months, and people, and a process he didn't have access to yet. But a concept package that any competent automotive designer or senior executive would recognize immediately as the real thing. Proportional studies, surfacing direction sketches, a powertrain layout, an interior volume study, a 3-page design rationale in his own hand, written the way he always wrote design rationales, in the marginless shorthand he had developed over 15 years. And that, if you could read it, described a car with the efficiency of someone who had been thinking about it for 8 months, without stopping. June looked at the package on the last morning. She picked up Bram from the corner of the studio, where he'd been stationed as a kind of observer throughout the week, and she carried him to the table. And she looked at the drawings, one by one, with the unhurried quality she brought to things. She stopped at the proportional study, the clearest rendering, the one that showed the car most completely. "Is this the one that's already going?" she asked. "That's the one," he said. She held Bram up next to the drawing as if introducing them. "Bram thinks it's really good," she said. "He says it's better than the ones on the walls at the big building." Isaac looked at his daughter. The big building. She had been to his office twice, at ages 3 and 4, and had apparently catalogued the framed renderings on the walls with the thoroughness of a very small archivist. "Bram might be right," he said. She put Bram down on the table, in front of the drawing, trunk slightly bent, river clay ears forward. "I know," she said. "He usually is." The board meeting was on a Friday. Isaac did not attend the board meeting. He was not, as of 8 days ago, an employee of Meridian Motors, and board meetings at Meridian Motors were not open to non-employees. Bernard Lowe attended the board meeting. Bernard Lowe was a former executive of Meridian Motors with board observer rights that had been granted at his retirement, and that, unlike several other things at Meridian, had not been quietly repositioned. Bernard brought 3 things to the board meeting. The first was the transfer log, with Mara's annotation of the service account access. The second was a printed copy of Isaac's original origination documents, time-stamped, signed in Isaac's hand, archived in Isaac's personal backup, showing the concept platform had originated with him in full 14 months ago. The third was a 1-page letter from Preston Hall, Isaac's former Saturday class instructor, now 71, who had followed Isaac's career with the attention of someone who recognized in it the direct consequence of his own work, and who had, when Bernard called him, agreed to document, in writing, what he had seen in a 14-year-old's drawings nearly 2 decades ago, and what he saw in the origination documents Bernard sent him. Bernard Lowe presented these items to the board in the order in which they established what was true. First, that the concept platform had an author. Second, that the author was not Dominic Carr. Third, that Dominic Carr had known this, and had taken calculated steps over 3 months to obscure it. He did not raise his voice during any of this. Bernard Lowe had spent 40 years in rooms where the truth needed to be stated clearly and sourced correctly, and he understood that the volume at which truth is delivered is largely irrelevant to its effect. The board asked 4 questions. Bernard answered 3 of them directly and referred the 4th to the documents. At 11:47 in the morning, Dara Venn, who had been in the room throughout, at the head of the table, in the particular stillness of someone processing information that is reorganizing the room around her, asked that the meeting be paused. She left the room for 7 minutes. When she came back, she said, "Where is Isaac Cole?" He was in Patricia's kitchen with June making lunch. Bram was on the counter, stationed beside the bread box. June was cutting the crusts off her sandwich with a child's knife, slowly and with great seriousness, because she had recently decided that she preferred her sandwiches without crusts, a preference that Isaac was in no position to argue with. His phone rang at 11:54. He looked at the screen. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. Mr. Cole, I need to ask you to come in today. I understand that's an unusual request given the circumstances, he said. What circumstances have changed? A silence, not a long one. The silence of someone who is choosing their words with a precision they have recently learned to apply. The circumstances related to the platform project, she said, and to Dominic Carr. He said, I'll need a few hours. Of course. And I'll need to bring something with me, she said. Bring whatever you need. He arrived at 3:15, not the lobby entrance, the side entrance, the one that designers used, because it was closer to the studio floors. The security guard at the side entrance was a man named Terrence, who had worked there for 9 years, and who had, every day of those 9 years, nodded at Isaac Cole as he came through the door. Terrence nodded at him now. Isaac nodded back. The concept package was in a flat portfolio case, black, worn at one corner, the same case he had carried since his 2nd year working. He had Bram in the tote bag beside it, because June had pressed Bram into his hands before he left and said, "So he can see the big building." And Isaac had not found a way to explain why this was logistically complicated. Dara Venn met him in a smaller room this time, not the conference room, her office. 6 people, Dara, 2 board members, a man named Adrian Walsh, who had asked the 4th question and who turned out to be a former automotive executive, which explained the 4th question, and 2 lawyers, and Priya Mehta, the operations director, who was becoming a recurring presence in the rooms where things got resolved. Isaac put the portfolio case on the table. He opened it. He placed the drawings one at a time, not quickly, with the deliberateness of someone who has spent 8 days producing something and understands that the way it is presented is not incidental to the presentation. The room was quiet as each sheet landed, not the quiet of nothing happening, not the quiet of a room performing attention. The quiet of people who understand what they are looking at and are taking the time to look at it correctly. Adrian Walsh, the former automotive executive, the man who had asked the 4th question, stood up after the 5th sheet. He stood and came around the table and looked at the proportional study from 2 feet away. He put on his glasses, which he had been keeping folded in his breast pocket. He looked at the surfacing direction sketch. He looked at the powertrain layout. He said, "When did you start this?" 8 months ago, Isaac said. In the margin, mostly. It formalized in the last 8 days. Walsh looked at the design rationale. He read it slowly. He turned 2 pages. He looked up. "This is not the platform project," he said. "No," Isaac said. "This is something else." "Yes." Walsh looked at Dara Venn. Dara was looking at the proportional study. She had the expression of someone who has been handed a version of a situation that is not the version she was handed before and is understanding, in real time, the distance between the two. She said, "What is this?" Isaac said, "It's what I was drawing on the napkin." The room was quiet again. Dara Venn looked at him. She looked at the drawings. She looked at the tote bag, from which Bram's trunk was visible above the edge. She looked back at Isaac. "I owe you an explanation of what happened here," she said. And more than an explanation. She said what she had done. She named the meeting. She named the words she'd used. She named the assumption she had made. A man with an ink-stained shirt and a canvas tote bag, and a child's drawing taped to the outside, and a stuffed elephant on the handle, sketching on a napkin while the quarterly results played on the screen. And she named what the assumption had cost, and who had exploited it, and what she intended to do about Dominic Carr, which was everything the law permitted, and then also the things the law required. She said it all specifically. She did not use the phrase, "I'm sorry if." She used the words, "I was wrong because," and she used them more than once. When she was done, she said, "What would it take to bring you back?" Isaac looked at the drawings on the table. He thought about the studio at Patricia's house. He thought about June's voice. He thought about the napkin in his shirt pocket, still there, folded to the same fold. He said, The concept platform credit restored, in full, on record. With Mara acknowledged for the documentation work. Done, Dara said. A proper structure for this project. He indicated the drawings. Not a job, a design partnership. Named, on paper, done. And I leave at 5:30, he said. Every day, without exception. Because I have somewhere to be at 6. Dara looked at him. She looked at the tote bag, at Bram's visible trunk. Done, she said, without exception. Adrian Walsh, who had remained standing at the corner of the table with the proportional study in his hands, said, May I keep this one? Isaac looked at him. For today, he said. Send it back Monday. Walsh looked at the drawing for another moment. He said, not to Dara, not to the room, almost to the paper itself. This is the best thing to come out of this company in 7 years. Nobody in the room disagreed. June was asleep by the time he got back to Patricia's house. He looked in on her. She was in the deep, absolute way of children, who have spent their energy completely and found the bottom of the day with nothing left to spare. Bram was in his usual place, in the crook of her arm, trunk slightly bent, river clay ears at ease. He had put Bram back in the tote bag after the meeting. He had carried him through the lobby and past Terence and through the side entrance, and to the truck and back to Patricia's. Bram had been to the big building. Mission accomplished. Patricia was in the kitchen. She poured him tea without asking. She sat across the table. He told her what had happened. She listened the way she always listened. Without interruption, with the still attention of someone who processes rather than reacts. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Nora would say you took too long. He smiled, not a large smile. The kind of smile that comes from somewhere real and doesn't need to be larger than it is. She would have said a lot of things, he said. She'd be right. He held the tea with both hands. He thought about the napkin. 22 lines, 3 curves. A car that looked like it was already going somewhere, even standing still. He thought about June, cutting crusts in the morning light, asking Bram's opinion on things and trusting the answer. He set the tea down. He went to the spare room, his studio, for as long as he needed, and he turned on the drawing lamp, and he pulled a fresh sheet from the pad, and he uncapped the pencil. He had a car to build. He started at the beginning, the way good things start, with a single line that didn't know yet what it was going to become.